All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to Virtual Face-to-Face with President Bruce Jarrell. I'm Alex Lakowski, Executive Director of Media Relations. A series of yellow fever outbreaks in the 1790s took the lives of tens of thousands in cities along the East Coast, including many right here in Baltimore. Two young doctors, many of you know this story, Nathaniel Potter and John Beal Davidge, wanted to know why. They wanted to know what the cause was and how it could be prevented or best treated. They pushed the Maryland legislature to establish a medical college. It would provide education to train Maryland doctors to care for the sick and research to understand and overcome impediments to good health. It didn't take long. A few years later, in 1812, the legislature came to realize that happy and productive lives require more than medicine. So the college was rechartered as the University of Maryland, with faculties of law, divinity, and arts and sciences, all endeavoring to educate and discover new knowledge. Now, 2 centuries later, that mission remains mostly unchanged, but of course, just about everything else has changed a great deal, and lately that change is accelerating. What started as the College of Medicine of Maryland now includes more than 170,000 students at 12 University System of Maryland institutions, and university research has grown just as much. Taken together, USM attracts more than $1.5 billion in external grants each year, and about 3/4 of that derives from the two largest and very different research institutions, the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the University of Maryland, College Park. Now, those differences are notable because, owing to their disparate origins, one is a medical college and the other is an agricultural school, and very different missions, mostly professional training on the one hand and mostly undergraduate education on the other, there's never really been much overlap in research. Surprisingly, it wasn't until very recent years that state and university leaders began to realize that those differences weren't a reason we couldn't work together. Instead, they offer numerous opportunities for collaborative research that neither university could perform alone. I'll put computer scientists and engineers from College Park together with doctors, dentists, pharmacists, and nurses from Baltimore, and you've got 100 new ideas to tackle chronic pain, overcome opioid addiction, revolutionize critical care, you name it. And now add lawyers and criminologists and social workers and sociologists into the mix, and you get new ideas on how to identify and unlearn implicit bias in policing, combat human trafficking, reduce violent crime in cities, and so much more. Now, the first step in 2012 was the informal Empowering the State initiative. That blossomed into the University of Maryland Strategic Partnership Empowering the State by an act of the legislature in 2016. Just 2 years later, Dr. Laurie Locascio was named vice president, the first vice president for research for the combined UMB-UMCP research enterprise, removing any doubt about our commitment to collaborate and catapulting the University of Maryland research into the highest echelons of university research in the country. In the most recent National Higher Education Research and Development, or HERD survey, our combined $1.2 billion in externally funded research ranked us as 10th among public institutions and 16th overall in R&D spending. Of course, we can all be proud of the funding and the rankings, but the most important thing is that it shows we are finding opportunities to work together to improve the human condition in Maryland and everywhere else. Last fall, at his inauguration, President Jarrell ran through a long list of extraordinary accomplishments in every school at UMB. I'm surrounded by creative people, he said, people committed to improving the health and well-being of the people around us in our community. This is the magic of UMB, and it's the secret to our great success. Magic like this is fragile. We have to work hard as leaders to keep that magic alive. And part of the trick is keeping it alive is standing out in front of the world, anticipating future needs, finding new opportunities, and staying a step ahead. Well, joining Dr. Jarrell today is someone newly appointed to help him and to help President Darrell Pines in College Park keep the magic alive and look to the future. That's Dr. Gregory Ball. He's the new Vice President for Research for the University of Maryland, succeeding the aforementioned Dr. Locascio, who answered the call to return to government service. Dr. Ball joined UMCP in 2014 as Professor and Dean of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences. He was previously Vice Dean for Science and Research Infrastructure at the Krieger School for Arts and Sciences at Hopkins. As you might imagine, as the VP of Research, he is himself a prolific researcher. His lab studies the interrelation of hormones, the brain, behavior, and reproduction, particularly in birds. Welcome, Dr. Ball. I have to remind everyone that this program is being recorded, of course. It will be posted on the university website, umaryland.edu. If you have questions or comments for Dr. Ball, Don't wait. Please write them in the chat area whenever they pop into your head. When the time comes for audience questions, I'll call on you by name and open your mic for you. So all you have to do is speak up. And of course, if you want to remain anonymous, that's okay too. Just let me know and I'll read your question for you. Now, please welcome your host, UMB President, Dr. Bruce Jarrell.
Thank you, Alex, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to welcome those of you out in the audience. I hope we have an interesting session today. You heard a little bit about Dr. Ball's background, and we'll learn more about it, but actually, Greg, the question that everybody's waiting to ask you is, are you an ornithologist, a bird watcher, a twitcher, or a chiroptologist? Which are you?
Well, I'm technically a card-carrying professional ornithologist in that I'm a fellow of the American Ornithologists Union, and I attend ornithological congresses and give addresses. However, I've never had an appointment as an ornithologist. But first and foremost, I came to birds because of scientific interest. It's true. Having said that, my father had been trained in zoology at George Washington and was also an avid birder. So I grew up following him around the Eastern Shore and places in Maryland, learning the names of birds. And so I also have a great desire to watch birds, but I wouldn't call myself a twitcher. I'm happy to watch a common bird behave and do interesting things all day long. A real twitcher just wants to get that species and then get the next one, because they're always working on their life lists. So they're all kind of interrelated for me.
Well, I didn't know there was such a thing as a chiroptologist. You're not one of those either, though, right?
No, not really.
So there was something Alex and I looked up ahead of time to trick you. That's a bat watcher. I didn't know such a thing existed, but I guess it does.
Chiroptera, yes.
Chiroptera, exactly.
That's the order, yeah.
Yeah, well, anyhow, well, thank you for being here with us today. And I think I will certainly be interested to hear a little bit about your bird research. But before we get that, why don't we talk just a little bit about, you now stand at the fore of a large research enterprise at two universities and where we're headed and what you see as the future. So in your brief time in this role, but having been in Maryland for a long time, well, what do you see as the great strengths of our two institutions, and where is the potential to be really, really great?
So the strengths are that when you line up the two institutions, we have excellence over a wide range of disciplines, which are fundamental to the future of the United States. And the beauty of it is that these range from the physical sciences to the natural sciences to the social sciences, along with the clinical and professional endeavors. Every great university, research university in the United States and the world, leverages things like their professional schools who are committed to a particular mission, such as medicine and that kind of thing, with their schools involved in fundamental discovery. And, we have done this to varying degrees over the years, as Alex noted. I mean, at one time, remember, our two institutions were actually merged, and then they split them up again. But our potential here is to bring cutting edge developments in the physical and engineering sciences, and then have them inform and inspire people working on the front lines of some of the most important questions facing us today in terms of health, behavioral health, addiction, et cetera, et cetera. And I just see the potential to leverage the kinds of things going on in fundamental science with the kinds of things going on in applications as just we have done a number of wonderful things, but there's still a beautiful future ahead of us to do that. And we just have to overcome barriers, things like geography, culture, history, that are have built inertia to working together.
Right. Well, it's a lot to do. You mentioned basic science discoveries and their importance. Can you think off the top of your head one or two really important basic science discoveries that have occurred at College Park or at Baltimore that have really transformed things and have that kind of potential?
Well, I think, one of the ones that's very exciting and most recent is the development of quantum theories into actual practical applications. So we have built one of the best quantum computers in the world, and that is not going to just enhance high performance computation. That's going to transform computation. It's going to put us in another position that we weren't in before. And many of the fundamental discoveries related to that were done at College Park. And the quantum ideas aren't going to just apply to computers and things like that. They're also going to apply things like quantum sensors, which would be a whole new way to monitor human physiology in a way that's less invasive and that sort of thing. When thinking about in Baltimore, again, I have a recency effect. I'm thinking about recent things. When you think about the success of the xenotransplant, with Dr. Griffiths and Mohammed's work, which has just been fantastic. There you took a combination of surgical skill, modern molecular biology, thought through what you needed to manipulate genes to make this organ. It's always been known that pigs are a good model for a lot of human syndromes like skin, etc. But then to combine that with modern molecular biology to engineer a pig so that this organ would be accepted and be able to survive, that's a tremendous breakthrough that could just change the whole game in terms of the availability of transplants.
So you mentioned quantum computing and quantum sensors. Where do you see the future of quantum? First of all, explain to me what quantum sensing means, and then where do you see what kind of miracles can we expect from quantum sensors?
Well, I'm still learning about it myself, to be truthful. So I'm not going to try to give you a. Let's just look at some practical applications. Without power, without a battery, and without a power input, you can have devices that are going to be detecting changes at the quantum level that can then be picked up and provide you with insight into the health of an entity, like an organ, and that sort of thing, so that we can have a whole new way of trying to detect and measure human biological processes.
So I know we've been talking about headlines. So tell me what that headline reads as, Greg.
um, Real-time monitoring of health and disease um, without strings attached.
Well, in the world of transplant, of course, it's always a question about how do I know whether my organ is being rejected by me or not, of course. And
Right?
of
You
course,
need to
we
find
have.
some biomarker, right? Measure something in the blood, maybe, or look at some other kind of measure. Correct?
Well, right now we have very crude measures.
Yeah.
What's my heart function or what's my serum creatinine? We don't have a lot of sophisticated measures.
So imagine if we were able to have something implanted in the organ that could give you a readout way ahead of these other biomarkers in the periphery. That's it sounds like science fiction now, but that's the kind of thing that's under discussion.
Right. Well, the closest we've come to that is real-time glucose monitoring, I guess, from my point of view. That's the one that seems to be out there right now. So cell phones can do remarkable things, can't they?
And we're just getting started.
Right. Now, I want to remind the audience to please get your own questions in to Alex, and we'll have time to have those questions asked, answered by Dr. Ball. But talk to us a little bit about the herd ranking. Tell people what that is and why that's so kind of neat.
So the national one thing people don't realize is the National Science Foundation, as part of its mission, monitors research activity in the United States, and it collects data and analyzes them every which way. And how do you capture research productivity? Ideally, we should be looking at papers, perhaps other products of research, conference presentations, technical reports, perhaps look at their citations, try to study their impact in that way. It's very complicated to do that. The where papers arrive, et cetera. I mean, and people do that, and it's helpful. But one indicator is the amount of resources, the amount of money an institution is able to attract in order to pursue its research mission. I mean, the value of using money is that it's a unit that is common. A dollar is a dollar is a dollar, and it's relatively easy to measure. And there's no question that competing on the national and world stage for research dollars is an indicator of excellence. And so the NSF has for many years collected all the federal dollars that are assigned to different universities and just publish a ranking. And sometimes when I talk to people about this, they say, well, it's just NSF money. No, it's Department of Defense. It's the National Institutes of Health. It is the NSF. It's energy. It's NIST, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And these are an indicator of the health of a research university. It's not perfect. Just because research is more expensive, some of the most highly funded research on the College Park campus is from NASA. And why is that? Because they're building instruments that go into space. And when you do that, your basic instrument is very expensive. And so the research dollars devoted are high. But this is an indicator of the maturity and the breadth of a university. Now, University of Maryland, Baltimore and University of Maryland, College Park, because they were separate campuses, for many years were in the rankings in the mid-level, somewhere between 400 and 600 million a year. And so each one was perfectly respectable. It was in the 40s or whatever compared to other universities, but you didn't get a sense of what was actually happening in Maryland more in the aggregate. And so by putting those together, all of a sudden we're in the elite. Having over $1 billion in research money, you can say, well, does it mean this? Doesn't mean that. It's an overall indicator of excellence. And it shows that our universities have a level of research productivity that is among the best in the country. And that is something that is a message that you want to send. It reverberates. So if you're looking for a place to have a faculty position, I want to be at a place that's happening. If you're thinking about a graduate program, that's where things are happening. I want to be part of that graduate program. So these kind of rankings make a difference. And, again, we have to be careful in how we interpret them. The person with the most expensive research isn't necessarily doing the most significant or impactful, but nonetheless, it is a measure, and it's a useful measure, and we should be proud of that.
Right. I agree with that. Of course, the trick is to continue to grow it, isn't it? So, well, you got to maintain it first, and then you got to grow it. And I guess one of the thoughts that I guess you've been entertaining is, how do I grow it? What are the opportunities, particularly collaborative between the two universities? Are there one or two projects that you think are really important for us to think about?
So, if we do a bit more macro than a single project, if you look at the portfolios of the two campuses, one thing jumps right out. The NIH funding plays a much bigger role in Baltimore in terms of percent of the research than it does at College Park. And, at first blush, well, that's not a surprise. The School of Medicine is a major player in Baltimore, but you also have the School of Dentistry and the School of Nursing and the Pharmacy College, and all of those are doing work that's relevant. School of Social Work, the College of Social Work as well. All of those are doing work that's relevant to NIH. Whereas, in College Park, we have in engineering and physics work that's important to the energy department, work that's important to NASA, and a lot of work that's important to DOD. But we also have a lot of significant NIH potential. We have NIH funding, but we're not leveraging it to the full degree that's possible. And some of the best NIH projects are ones that take technologies developed in certain fields and apply them to very difficult, tricky medical, clinical problems. And that's the kind of thing we need to do more of. again, when you look at the finest, which one of the finest public institutions of research in the United States? University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Some of you, I'm sure, have visited there or were trained there. What do they have? They have the medical school literally across the street from the arts and sciences, engineering, etc. And they have put together some spectacular projects that they can collaborate, and we need to do more of that. That's one area. There's also potential on the DoD side for more benefit to happen at Baltimore, and these are some obvious growth areas where we can try to leverage, and that's what the Empower Seed grants have been trying to do, is identify these areas and bring people together.
Great. Alex tells me we got a few questions popping out, so maybe Alex, let's get to them.
We do. Well, let's bring in. I'm going to bring in John Locke, who has a question about some of that physical distance you talked about and as a barrier. John, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's great. I attended University of Maryland College Park for undergrad. I was in the life science program in the Honors College and ended up working as researcher with Juan Uriagarega in linguistics, and he always spoke very highly of you.
I know him very well.
Yeah, and I actually, as an aside, I think your son John was also working with him.
He was
Yeah.
indeed.
I went to high school with him at Gilman. I was in the musical with him, actually.
Talk about small world.
It's a very small world, yes. I was just wondering, one of the things I noticed now that I'm here in the MD PhD program at UMB was that the physical distance seems to limit the opportunity for undergraduate students to work in labs at the other campus. And it was something that I noticed in undergraduate level, and now at the graduate level. It seems like there's a connection for bioengineering, but some of the other programs like neuroscience don't have the same sort of connected programs. So I was wondering what some of the ideas were that you had for connecting students at each campus, given the physical distance, given the separate funding and research mentor opportunities there. What are some of the things you're thinking about?
It's a really important question. And when you say students, I think the undergraduates are an important population to think about, but also the graduate students. So apropos the graduate students, the Neuro and Cognitive Science program at College Park and the program in neuroscience, PIN, has set up a kind of semester away program for neuroscience graduate students, where they will receive funding to spend one semester in a lab at the other campus. And this will be an opportunity for them to learn a technique, say, that the lab has, that their lab doesn't have, and help them with their on the way toward their dissertation. And this program is just getting started. We've had a few participants, but the hope is that by having a longer term funding, because commuting every day can be difficult, but if you relocate, you can then be in that lab. And graduate students are the glue that can promote collaborations and bring together. And so that's one example of a program that will be helpful, and we should try to think about more to try to promote these kind of interactions. There's also a summer scholar program for UMD undergrads for them to work up in Baltimore. That's very successful. But you're right. There's still a huge amount of inertia. I live in Baltimore in Federal Hill, so I personally know about the challenge of moving back and forth. But it's not insurmountable.
So, John, I would add that we've had the Scholars Program in place for probably 8 years, and we have it going in both directions. So College Park undergraduates come to Baltimore and spend a summer in the lab. We also have it where particularly social work and law students work in labs meaning social science labs and other situations down at College Park. That has been a very, I think, useful interaction. The other things that Dr. Ball mentioned about graduate students going back and forth, we just need to find more ways to do that, because as he said, that's the glue. that gets people talking, so a very important part. So we have focused on that. I just want to reemphasize, not just for the hard or biological sciences, but also for the social sciences and the like, which Dr. Ball knows a lot more about than I do. But that's been a priority with the Empower Committee as well.
It has. It has.
So, Alex?
All right, you mentioned the Empower. Sometimes we get confused or we conflate the two. Empower is a subset of research. It's it's an important part. It's not the only research that we would do together. Uh, Catherine Kite from the School of Medicine asked me to ask this question: how are the Empower funds allocated between the two campuses, and are there any plans to further leverage those funds to strengthen the intercampus collaboration? She says, how can UMB more effectively access or take advantage of Empower funds?
So the way the Empower funds have been managed has varied over the years. When I first came in 2014 as dean, shortly after the Empower program was established, Dr. Jarrell, Bruce, and Wallace Lowe, who was president of UMCP at the time, organized kind of a retreat for the deans in which we did speed dating, where we would go, the deans would meet with each other and talk about ideas. And then kind of a top-down set of RFPs came out on different topics that we thought there was common interest. And then the deans would agree on something they wanted to do together, and then send out a call and construct teams to work together. Now, I was involved in a team working on the opiates and the opiate addiction problem, and we had clinical work and we had basic science work on both campuses involved in that. And we came up with a budget, and I, for one, did not insist that it be absolutely equal between the campuses. I said that the budget should be, so in my budget, more of the money went to Baltimore than went to College Park. And one of my PIs in College Park said, "What are you doing? Why are you allowing this?" And I said, the budget is to get the science done. And this is where the money's needed for the science, and this is how we're going to do it. But the overall budget ended up synergizing and helping both individuals. Now, most recently, we had a call for seed grants in a number of areas, and I think $3 million was allocated for that. This was before I was on the VPR position, since I'm a recent appointee, as you know. So I don't want to claim I was involved in organizing, setting, although I was involved at the final meeting with the evaluation. And there was a wonderful diversity of projects at 11 different colleges at the two campuses were represented, and there was roughly equal allocation of funds between the two colleges. But that was very much bottom up, where there was a call for proposals. Individuals contacted colleagues at the other campus and came up with proposals that they put forward. The other new advance with Empower that just started is the so-called Empower Professor, which provides $150,000 for 3 years. And the requirement was that you were working between the two campuses. And I think that kind of thing could really start to enhance. That's another kind of interneuron that's going to promote our interactions, if you will, between the two campuses by having research active faculty who are making connections across the campuses. And we're trying hard for those to be represented in a wide variety of disciplines.
All right, we have an anonymous question, more directed toward what we're experiencing now. How do you see the two universities working together to be better prepared for the next pandemic? Well, I think you could probably take that in two ways. I mean, you could take it in terms of what are we working on in science, but also, to make sure that our research enterprises are prepared to go through the kinds of, gyrations we had to go through to keep them running when the pandemic first hit.
Just trying to remember, I'm looking at my notes. Don Milton, who's in the School of Public Health at College Park, has been looking at things like how volatiles are passed in the air after coughing and things like that, and how ventilation systems can affect that. And I believe he has a joint project with the medical school. Bruce, you might know better than me to look at look at just that issue from the research perspective. So that's one example on the research side. We actually published, we actually funded 3 projects in the most recent seed grants on pandemic readiness, resilience, and mitigation.
So let me add a little bit to that one, I think, because I think there are worthwhile things to talk about. You all may remember that there was a thing called Ebola, and before that, other viruses, and some after that. I think part of the answer to your question about pandemic preparedness is what kind of base funding do you have in your research programs, for example, virology and vaccine development, that are there building programs, doing clinical trials every day, developing vaccines? And I think from the Baltimore point of view, we had a very rich and long-standing history of those kinds of research enterprises. So you could say we weren't ready for COVID, but I don't think you could say we weren't ready for viral infections and epidemics. Now, the pandemic was yet another area of development, but I think from a lot of points of view, there were a lot of things in place here. Don Milton was certainly in place down at College Park to study the aerosolization of viruses and how viruses spread that way. So there was a lot of infrastructure. However, the other thing I would say is we've learned 2 really big things in this process. One, that although the science is really important, it's not the only important thing. And there's a whole lot of things that become important. One of the things that just I learned over and over again was how important something as mundane as logistics was. And how do you keep an apparatus in place that delivers PPI or vaccination or whatever you needed in the peak of the pandemic? There was also a really good lesson that was learned because College Park has a very significant effort in cell phone data and where people are and what kinds of precautions they're taking, et cetera. And so surveillance, not the kind that the FBI does, but public health surveillance becomes a really important thing here. So I think the answer to your question is we do need to have a broad strategy. It's not just about virology. It's about all these areas. And I think we are poised to do that. And I think President Pines and I have had multiple discussions about developing a pandemic preparedness center. I think there's still work to be done on that, but that's a vision that we think is very important. The other thing I would say is important is follow the money. Okay, and some of you may remember we used to have a program called the Mercy. It was a mid-Atlantic program in infectious diseases. There was also one in chemical attacks, et cetera, with Dr. Albuquerque being involved. And I think as the federal government funds things, we're able to do even more and more. So I hope you will see additional funding come to these 2 institutions around those kinds of preparedness things. So support will be an important thing. But I'll stop at that point, Alex.
Okay, let's bring in Osama Saidi with a question about Empower Professorships.
Thanks so much. I'm faculty in Department of Ophthalmology and also adjunct in bioengineering. I had a question. You had mentioned the Empower Professorships. Some faculty have asked me, and I'm sort of curious as to, is there a priority for that? Professors who are sort of more senior, those who are early career, mid-career? Just sort of curious about that.
I think, so I wasn't involved in the selection of them. My sense was that one of the criteria was the extent to which they had collaborations already between the 2 campuses. And so there tended to be fairly established faculty because they had a strong track record. Right now, as far as I know, it's not targeted particularly. So for instance, it's not viewed as a career development professorship. It's really viewed in terms of the way it can facilitate the collaboration between the two institutions. Bruce, do you have a comment on that?
Well, and the potential to develop new collaborations, not just in a particular discipline, as Dr. Ball was saying. So the past performance and the future opportunity, looking at it that way. Alex?
I'm going to read you an anonymous question. I think it's pretty safe to assume, though, that this is a UMB researcher. The person writes, there are currently some challenges with including researchers at both UMB and College Park on the same research proposal, in particular, challenges related to lead time, given separate internal deadlines, parenthetically, which often makes it harder to collaborate with College Park than with other institutions. What steps are you considering to make it easier to have researchers across the campuses collaborate on joint research submissions?
Yeah, well, I'd like to hear the particular issue. I guess he's referring to internal deadlines that the grants office have at the two institutions.
That's what it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would be great to normalize those. We're trying to have more routine discussions between equivalent units. It's early days on that from my perspective, but those are just the kind of little details that can drive you crazy when trying to do something. And I would invite this person to write me about that, so that I can have the details of the challenge and try to address it.
But I would certainly add two other things to that. I believe I'm correct in saying we have normalized the way the indirect cost recovery works between the two universities. That was an issue in the past, but much more significant than that, we made it so quali coius. People had access at both campuses and ability for the administration to approve the grant on behalf of both of the campuses. So for example, an NSF proposal that involves both campuses can get approved and submitted from College Park because they have that expertise, and an NIH grant can be approved and submitted by Baltimore because we have expertise in that area. So there was a lot of attention to the electronic submission of grants as well.
All right. Here's another anonymous question. And what's great is being new in this role, you can be as blue sky as you want. So this person writes, do you see any areas of research collaboration that we aren't exploring or aren't exploring fully enough? Like, we've talked about some of the things that ballyhooed, computers and engineering with medicine and so forth, but where are we not? Where's the next big opportunity?
Well, I'm going to actually switch to the social sciences. We have a problem in this state with violence, and in particular gun violence. And we have significant work going on in that area. I want to mention Joe Richardson, who's one of the inaugural groups of Empower professors, who's been working on this issue in Prince George's County and in Baltimore City. But, I think one of the greatest things we could do for this state would be to leverage people in the School of Social Work, the relevant legal stuff in the law school, with members of the social studies, social science departments at College Park, to try to really start to look at programs and interventions that can change the pattern of violence, which is such a plague on the growth and health of the populations in the two jurisdictions our universities occur in. And that's an area, because the problem seems so intractable, it's often not listed as something, but that's a challenging problem where I think there's a huge amount of potential, and we want to bring to bear all sorts of resources to try to address it.
Yeah, let me add too, Alex. One is I still think that engineering and medicine, we've only touched the surface, and the potential there is so huge and requires a lot, I think, of attention. The other one is I know that there's a lot of interest in neuroscience collaboration. And there's a lot of depth on the UMB campus and certainly information processing on the College Park campus. That has to be an opportunity. And we've got to somehow figure out how to make that a much larger enterprise. But I agree with the violence part, Greg. I think that's really an important area.
Yeah, and I completely agree with the two areas you mentioned. We neuroscience in particular, there's been some very productive, very good interactions, but the potential is greater than what's been done. I completely agree.
Yeah. Alex?
All right, another anonymous question. And I'm not sure whether this person understands exactly how things are organized. I'm going to read it and see what you can make of the question. What infrastructure and resources are available at UMB, at the UMB campus level, to support research and Dr. Ball? Is there a research office at UMB with staff to actually take steps to support research on campus?
So there's a research development office that on Jim Hughes's shop. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
But then I know that in the individual schools, there's personnel who promote. So within the School of Medicine, Dean Reese has promoted a project. What is it called? The GAP? I'm sorry, I'm still learning the acronyms in Baltimore, but do either of you remember the name of it? It's a program in which they'll provide support to help develop proposals for very large collaborative research programs.
Strap?
No, STRAP was to recruit faculty.
It was, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you got it. Go ahead.
Anyway, sorry, I can't remember the exact name because I had in one of my meetings with Dean Reese, I talked about ways for us to join forces in providing program managers and other kinds of resources like graphics in order to help get large collaborative grants out the door between the two campuses. So, you know, it's daunting sometimes for a PI to organize a team. And if we can do things to help it and get the mechanics done and they can focus on the science and the creativity, that's the kind of thing you need to do to really spark research activity.
Okay.
All right, this one's a little out of left field, but you know, I've been thinking about it. I've been holding off on this question, but you know, it seems almost cruel to have a researcher on and not give him at least one opportunity to say something about his research. So the question is, what's the most surprising thing we lay people don't know about birds?
So, in songbirds, who you know they sing every spring. So even the most hardened urbanite notices that right about now, birds are starting to make noise that they didn't make before. And you know, you won't know the different kinds of birds. Lots of them make noise. But songbirds like sparrows and starlings and cardinals and things that are around, they actually reorganize their brains every year under the influence of steroid hormones in order to produce these learned songs at a very high rate of speed, control, and quality that they need to successfully reproduce. And so when you see a bird singing very well, you should know that that has involved adult neurogenesis with new connections, long projections in the brain. And much of this is mediated and promoted by steroid hormone action, which occurs cyclically every year. So it's kind of like they go through puberty every year, and it's puberty associated with major brain reorganization. And that's a fascinating aspect underlying this behavior we hear every year.
You're telling me the wren on my window every morning has got roid rage? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, actually, you know, when you see birds fighting in the spring, it's because the it's not perfectly causal, but it is a contributing factor. The high androgens.
Right. Greg, one question maybe that you've learned a little bit about is now our operation at Shady Grove and IBBR. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see as the opportunities out there? And maybe tell people what's out there if you knew.
Well, I'm gonna have you're probably gonna have a better catalog of everything than me. That what President Jarrell is referring to is that Shady Grove is a campus in Montgomery County that involves contributions from several universities in the system, including College Park and Baltimore. And at one time, it actually involved input from Hopkins, but I think their lab has now closed out there. If I thought I heard that, but it's educational as well as research, and what it does is that it leverages Montgomery County and the tremendous activity going on there in biomedicine on 270, and then also student interest. You know, we run several undergraduate and master's programs at Shady Grove that captures a very talented, hardworking workforce who want to improve their situation. And at the same time, there's research and activities going on, which actually it reminds me, Bruce, now that I'm in this position, I need to go back there and visit.
Well, for the group, there's very powerful structural biology capability there.
Yeah, they have incredible NMR, don't they?
They do. We have cryo-EM down there now. We also have a very significant collaboration with National Institute for Standards and Technology. There's just a rich opportunity there for collaborative research, and both institutions are active in that research program. So it's just worth learning about for those of you who don't know about it.
Got
How
a
about
couple.
other?
Yep,
Go
we've
ahead,
got a
Alex.
couple questions. One is, and I'm interested in this. This is the second one. I'm going to ask this first. So I'm going to take a little point of privilege here. What's happening with the Blended Reality Center? We haven't heard about that much lately, and that got a lot of very exciting collaborative buzz for a while.
I'm not up to speed on that.
Oh, that was Amitabh Varshney and Sarah Murthy and
Sarah Murthy. So
pulling together the sort of virtual reality in medicine.
VR and the AR.
Right,
Yes.
right.
I know he has the lab in the IREB Center, and they worked with shock trauma on setting up training videos and things.
So this was a project that would allow multifaceted, but basically it was to allow augmented reality to take place in two situations. One was learning experiences, and one was trying to mitigate certain medical situations, particularly pain. And those of you who know Dr. Perman, he was one of these trial participants where you would be subjected to a standardized pain, and you'd have on the virtual reality goggles, and depending upon whether you were looking at something soothing, et cetera, or not, the pain would be more or less. And it was actually a quite effective way to lessen the pain of a particular individual. And I know Asaf Keller was on a while ago on this call and was part of that trial. A lot of people were involved in that activity. So it just had a lot of neat aspects to it. It's still going on, although the Empower funding, I think, eventually ran out on that. I believe it resulted in other funded programs. So that was a success and a kind of a neat thing to do.
Indeed. No, I love that stuff. And that's another area where we're just getting started.
Yep. Alex, we only got a few minutes left.
Okay. Well, this is a little different. I guess I'm going to try to translate this. I guess the question boils down to, do you have any, would you consider, do you have plans to, I don't know a better way to put it than have faculty mixers where you might put people together who would be prime candidates for collaborative work? In other words, how do we get them to be aware of each other and meet each other? And
it's an excellent question, and it's an important one, and I've been thinking about, let's do lunch kind of things. But let's start with some lower hanging fruit. We're not communicating with each other enough about our research activity. So, for instance, we have a weekly research roundup in College Park, which just, it's an email that highlights cool things that are happening. I when I was dean, I really enjoyed it because there's stuff going on across campus that I didn't have time to find out and I didn't know about. And I know at different schools in Baltimore, I've seen the one at the School of Medicine the most, will highlight the interesting research. And I had a chat with Dean Reese. I said, how would you feel if we started working on a joint newsletter where we would highlight work on each campus that's important, but also work in common. And I want to be very careful about sending people emails that they don't solicit, because some people get very touchy about that. But he was very enthusiastic and very supportive, and so that's something I want to continue discussion. I want to start discussions with about doing that. A faculty expertise database that captures the campuses and maybe beyond. You're trying to put together a team for a research project, whatever area it is. Who's available close by who I could work with? How do I find them? Well, one thing you can do is start guessing on departments and going through websites. Imagine if you had a database where you could just enter keywords and then the relevant names. I mean, some of these new mechanisms for faculty expertise databases will actually put a request for proposal that's newly announced, put it into the system and say, here are people who could work on this topic and give you a head start on building a team. I was talking to Steve Davis about that, who runs the CTSA, and he would love to have something like that to help the people make connections. And so these are some things we're starting to discuss. The mixer kind of idea, I think, is something where we have to figure out how to do it in a targeted way where it's, top down assignment of collaborations often doesn't work. People collaborate, scientists are all entrepreneurs and they pick who they want to work with and they make the decision. So you have to figure out a way to bring an occasion where people will have something in common, and then you facilitate them having conversations. And if only a small percentage of them pay off, it's probably worth it.
Right. Another question here is that a healthy research environment is also good for recruiting researchers. How are you involved in that, and what role do you play, or are you just aware of it?
You mean recruiting faculty?
Recruiting faculty, particularly research faculty, or I'm guessing the question really is research faculty who sometimes have grants that they can bring with them, right?
Right. So usually it's the department or the entity hiring that takes the lead. And now again, this is early days for me in this job. My sense is that the VPR isn't pulled in on those very often unless there's a very specific thing they want to hear about. I mean, when I was dean, I did this all the time to try to make the case of why this is a great place to come. It's certainly something that if we think it would be helpful in a recruit, I would be very open to meeting just to talk about the research services and support, especially for a researcher who's bringing a very large program and is worried about the kind of support they'll get in terms of handling it. I would be more than happy to chat. And
Alex,
more than chat, cheerlead.
Yeah, gotcha. Alex, we're just about out of time. Maybe one more.
Well, it seems like it'd be wrong if we didn't, and I'm gonna push a little bit. It'd be wrong if we didn't bring in Adrienne Arthur, who is sort of a collaborator in a way, because she is the orchestra conductor for Empower.
Yes.
Adrienne, I opened your mic, but she's been back and forth with me during this program about sort of filling in the gaps. Is there anything you want to talk about with Empower and how Empower operates and contributes to research?
Well, I didn't actually prepare myself to respond.
Oh, it's okay. You don't have to be prepared.
Say to everyone though, I mean, Empower is certainly you have to think of it as a bit of a connecting space, right? It is the collaborative space. I like to say, and I'm the only one who says this, that Empower is often just a state of mind. It allows and it creates that collaboration space. So not everything that Empower is doing or associated with is linked to some kind of funding, but it is about bringing people together and connecting people at that level. So we're talking about researchers, we're talking about faculty, we're talking about students, and I guess that's that and what Empower, or the University of Maryland Strategic Partnership, is really looking for is those programs that would be unattainable. This is their distinguishing feature. They would be unattainable or very difficult to achieve if these two universities weren't the leads in this. So this isn't like a plug and play. This is finding the best at UMB and at College Park and bringing those two things together.
And just to reinforce what Adrian said, when I was Dean of Behavioral and Social Sciences, one of the most exciting Empower programs I was involved in was educational. And it was with the School of Law, where we had faculty from the law school led by Don Tobin, the dean, Donald Tobin, teaching undergraduates interested in law in College Park. And it was a tremendous help for students who, they were in a program called Law and Society, Justice and Social Thought. These programs were a tremendous help for students who were trying to understand what is the current situation about going to law school, what are the pros and cons, what are the choices, what can I do? And as Adrian said, it brought people together, and it brought top-notch law school faculty in contact with some of our bright undergraduates. This is an ongoing educational program. It's just terrific.
Yeah. I should note that I did not tell you that Dean Tobin was in the audience. So you didn't say that. You didn't say that because you don't know he's in the audience, but I'm telling you now. So
I didn't know that.
Nice of you to say that. No.
Well, Adrian's is profound as always, Adrian. So thank you for your comments. I think we're about out of time. So let me end by thanking Dr. Ball for being here with us, our new Vice President for Research, who has the great task of pulling two great universities even closer together. So, Greg, it's nice to have you on board, and I know we're all looking forward to working with you. With that, thank you all very much. Until next time, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bruce. It was very, very enjoyable. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.